So like I said earlier, we're going to dive into some advanced morphology for Firefly ID, and Oliver is going to give some live demos and get to see how to ID these species doing some dissection work.
This is a Photinus species. This is actually Photinus paralis that I caught maybe a couple of years ago in North Carolina. And I'm going to demonstrate the pinning process. So I put it usually on my pinning block and I hold it down, and then I go into the right side of the elytra. I usually don't do it under a camera, so it's a little less room than I used to. And then I use my pinning block to give it, go to the right height of the pin, which is about, let's see. So you want a bit of the pin on the top so you can still handle the Firefly. You can see it's fairly straight. And here you can see I went through the right side of the elytra to pin it. And then now I would make a label on the computer. I would write my information down and put the label on right away if I have it. Sometimes I just put like a little label on for a little bit to like a handwritten label with the date and maybe a number or something, like a voucher number. And then I would let these things dry. So this one came out of ethanol just today. So it needs to dry a little bit. It's still not completely dry. You can see that it's glistening and stuff, and you can see this is a male. Has you can, oh God. You have the light organs. You can see it's a male. The pygidium and all of that, and I might use this one to extract the genitalia, but I have a couple of others that are fresher. So this one, because it was an alcohol, it's kind of stiff. So it's a little bit harder to get the genitalia out of it without damaging it. So I'm probably going to use a different specimen for that, but I will also demonstrate the pointing. So I'm going to take, so I have all these points in here. I'm going to take one out. I'm going to put it on the pinning block so you can see how that looks. And you can easily just cut that out with your with some scissors out of cardboard, but you want to make sure it's acid-free cardboard. So for long-term preservation. And then I use a pin, an insect pin, and I go at the end here, and I pin through, so it looks kind of like this. And then what I do is I take the pin and then I bend the tip of this of the point a little bit down, so I can show you here. So I bend it like this, and then I glue the Firefly on the side of that bent tip, so I won't cover anything of the ventral or dorsal side of the Firefly. And as I said before, I'm going to use a smaller Firefly. So anything that's below a centimeter, it's usually a good idea to point because a pin might just be too big for it, and you might destroy too much of the specimen. And then I just put a little bit of glue, and I use Elmer's, just clear, not the white Elmer's, but clear washable glue. That's what I use for that. Depending where you are, you have to be aware on drying. And so I go on the right side of the specimen, and I think this is inverted. It looks like I'm on the left side, but I go kind of on the side of the specimen and then glue it to it. And you want to again make sure it's kind of straight, like like this. And then I set this aside and let it dry for probably an hour or so in Florida. So the thing in Florida is, because of the humidity, things dry like the glue dries very slow. I was used to that, and I went on a visit to Montana, and I collected some specimens there and wanted to point them there, and I put the glue on the point, and literally seconds later, the glue was hard because there's no humidity there, and I was not used to that. So by the time I put the glue on the specimen with my point, it was already dry and didn't hold anymore. So you have to play around with that. But here in Florida, with the high humidity, it takes a little bit longer for them to dry. But that's basically how I do that. And then always put some kind of voucher number or a temporary label on your specimen. So when you come back later, when it's dry, you know which specimen that was, and you don't mix up your specimens, which can happen fairly easily. When you deal with more than a couple of specimens, sometimes it will, you might mix that up and then put the wrong data on the wrong specimen, which basically in scientific terms kind of makes it worthless because you can't use that information anymore. So now we're going to do a short intro before I do a try to show you a genitalia extraction. So I'm going to start another slideshow. Display settings. Share screen and this one. Okay, so we're going to talk, and by advanced Firefly morphology for this course, what I mean is basically the genitalia and the abdominal segments. A little more, we're going to go in a little more into detail on those. We could basically do 4 or 5 days of course and go really into detail on some of these things. I don't think that's necessarily for the purpose we're doing here, but basic knowledge about the genitalia I think is kind of interesting and will help you in case you do have a microscope at home and plan on doing microscope dissections. And just so here you have it on the left side, the one firefly, that's a male of, I think this was a Photinus piralis, what I chose. And then on the right you have females. And you can see that now. I will have more detail with explanations why in a little bit. But you can see the male has light organs on 2 segments. They're complete, both the segments both are complete light organ. On the female have very much smaller light organs, right? So because they sit more around and they don't fly around and need that. And then when we zoom in, here you can see the male on the left, and you can see the pygidium, which is this one, and you see the 8th and 9th segment, which are here, which are covering the genitalia. So the genitalia is between this segment and the pygidium. If you would go into there with a pin or forceps, that's where the male genitalia are. And then here on the right side, that's the female, and you can see the female genitalia, part of it is actually out. This little thing with the 2 extensions, and you can see again, the light organ is much, much smaller, and I'll have a little more on that soon. Here is a drawing from Zaragoza et al. 2023, where they did the analyses of Photinus, Elicnia, Macrolampus, those genera, and they show evidence, morphological evidence that those genera seemingly are the same, and all are united under the name Photinus. So kind of these are in a way upside down or so, if you want to say that. I probably would have used pointed them around to show them, but this is like the typical Photinus genitalia, I'd say, for Tinus olignia in that. So you have the basal piece, which is attached to the firefly internally. Here, in the like bluish color. In the pink color, you have the lateral lobes. And the first picture is your dorsal view of the genitalia. The middle is the ventral, and the right is the lateral view, so from the side. So you have your lateral lobes, what we call them, that flank around here on the sides. The medium lobe is in yellow and green, basically, and the green one. So the lateral lobes flank the median lobe, and then some Photinus have this, some do not. The basal excrescences, which are these kind of like weird like things on the side here. So Photinus puralis has them. Some other Photinus do not. So the presence and absence of these will help you with some like put them in a certain species groups. And then here on the top of the median lobe, you have the median orifice, which is shaped very differently in a lot of different fireflies. But this is like the typical Photinus genitalia. These are different genitalia from the same paper, on the left side, just to show you how different they are in male Photinus species, and why they are therefore helpful in identification. So sometimes you have the lateral lobes, like in C, they're the same length. They probably look the same from both sides, but then here in G and in K, one of the lateral lobes is shorter than the other and differently shaped. So those are all things that we look at when we take them out. And that's what helps us with the identification. And some of these have these basal excrescences, and some do not. So like here, J has them, and here A and B don't seem to have them. So that's some of the good characters that you will use to identify your species level Photinus species. On the right side, you have a typical Futurus genitalia, and you can see here on part B, on part C, you have the LL is the lateral lobe, and here you can see they're actually attached to each other, the lateral lobes. The medium lobe is this really like kind of thin part in the middle, so very different from most of the Photinus on the left, where it's basically a little thicker, and the lateral lobes hardly touch them. If they do, it's more on the apex. And then you have this this additional part, which Heckscher here in 2013, when he described Futurus mystica lampus, calls the filaments. And there are these like little like thin filaments on the side of the rest of the aedeagus. And Jim Lloyd told me that he observed that those two filaments do not insert into the female during mating, but they stay on the outside of the abdomen. And he told me that he thinks or thought that it was kind of like a warning for them, like the male would like use them as a warning that the female might be done mating, so she wouldn't turn around and try to eat the male. So he thought it was kind of some kind of protective part of the aedeagus to prevent the male being eaten by its own female of its own species. I don't think anybody has really looked into that yet, if that's true or not. And as you can see, the genitalia are very small. So here you see the lines. So they're like a millimeter, half a millimeter. So they're very, very small in most fireflies. Some of them, like Chesperito and things, the whole genitalia are less than half a millimeter. So very hard to dissect, very easy to break sometimes. So you have to be careful when you try to extract them. They easily break. And if you break off a piece somehow, or you just a bit of the lobes or something, your genitalia might look completely different. So when you do it, you have to be extremely careful with these. And like you can see also in many Futuris, they're like this whitish color, cream color kind of, and then in Futinus on the left, you can see any kind of like brown to black, cream. Like there's sometimes also color variation, which I'm not sure if that will help within species, but or within complexes, but you can see very different a lot of times. This one is also from the same, from a different, this is from a different paper from the same lab. This is from Zurita Garcia. It's a life cycle and description of the immature stages of a Futinus firefly from Mexico. And here you have great pictures. This is like very good pictures for identification. You have a dorsal view, you can see almost everything. You have the ventral view, you see everything. And then you have the genitalia in all three views, the dorsal, the lateral, and the ventral view. This is different. C is dorsal, D is lateral, and E is the ventral view. So if I had a firefly from Mexico and I would extract the genitalia and I would look at this paper, it would be very easy to identify this particular species to the species level based on the images that they provided in this paper that came out last year. On top of that, they have all the immature stages in this paper as well with images. So it's a very nice written paper providing a lot of information about this particular species that's endemic to Mexico, so it can only be found there. So I'll talk a little bit about extraction of the aedeagus. So this on the left side is a method that Jim Lloyd used. And he pictures that in Jennifer. No, that's not all males. Some have just one segment, and some of them, the whole segment is not. So, but for the US fireflies, I think the two segments work very well. There's, I'm trying to think of any that don't have that. But you go into other genera in South America or in Asia, so there's definitely some that have very different light organs. But yeah, so on the left here you see that. So he would take a freshly caught and killed firefly, and he would lay it on a flat surface, and then he would take a pin on the 8th segment, and he would roll it back and forth. And then eventually the genitalia would come out, and then he would use forceps to pull them out further and then twist them, because if you don't twist them, they sometimes retract again. So you might want to extract them. So in a perfect world, you would leave the genitalia attached to the specimen. That is not always possible. Sometimes, especially in alcohol specimens, sometimes they just break out and they don't stay attached. In fresh caught specimens, it's much easier to keep them attached. But in a perfect world, you want to leave them attached. If that's not possible and you took them out, the right side shows you a method that was invented by Green, or he was shown by Green. He didn't, I'm sure there's others that did it before, but he would use one of those points I just showed you that I pointed the specimen on, put it on a pin, and then would put some glue on the tip, and then would put the genitalia that were taken out of the specimen on the glue with the basal piece down and the genitalia showing up. So and then let it dry completely so it's showing up. And then later on, if you have a microscope, you can take the pin between your fingers and you can rotate the pin, and you can see all 4 different views of the genitalia to compare to a drawing or a picture that you have in a publication. So this is also a good method, but be aware that you want to be very careful with that. If you live in a very humid place, the glue might never dry really. It might fall over, it might fall off. Unlike Green, what I do is I do not put that the genitalia on its own pin, I will put the point with the genitalia on it underneath the actual specimen, a little bit lower. So they are together, and you know what the genitalia, what specimen they came from. So I wouldn't like, or I wouldn't do the separate pin with the genitalia on it, unless you have a little unit tray where you keep the genitalia and the Firefly together and not mix it up with any other specimen. So, but otherwise I would put it underneath. Easier way to recognize whose genitalia you got there. And now I will try to see if I can show you how to get genitalia out the way I do it. Let's see. I got to go to the camera again. Okay. Share screen, camera, and actually let me. I'm right back. I have to get a couple specimens from the freezer. Just in case I have to do it more than once. I have one here that I took earlier out of the freezer that I caught last night. And again, this is much easier with a fresh specimen than it is with a one that was in alcohol. And so the first thing you want to do is, if you have an insect pin, the first thing I do is, let me adjust this down. I have this microscope slide, and I have an insect pin. And what I do is I use the insect pin and I press it against the slide. Sometimes you can also use you can use it with the you take the pin with the forceps, and you just have a little bit of the tip showing on the bottom, and then you press the tip of the pin against the glass slide, which then will bend. Let's see. I have one here where I've bent it. So I bent the tip of the pin here. You can see that there's a little hook at the top, right? So that's what you want. So you have a little hook, so you can go into the Firefly and extract the genitalia that way. You don't want to have a straight pin because it's much harder to do that. So then let's see. I have to find the Firefly. Get a little bit sharper. So you can see this is a male. Let's see, here's my hook. And then I use forceps with my left hand, or with your non-dominant hand, and I kind of like pin the Firefly down. This is harder for me because I can only see through one of the microscope lenses. So you go into between the 8th segment and the pygidium with your hooked pin. You can also pin it sideways, like, let me hold this right. You can see this is still a little wet from the freezer. But you go in between the pygidium and the 8th segment, and you kind of like you tease out the genitalia. Microscope is very low to do this with the camera on. But yeah, so you go in here and tease them out. Let's see. But in a perfect world, you don't want to break anything. Here they come. So here they are. So that now they're out. And then at the end, I take the forceps, I hold the Firefly down, I pull the genitalia out a little further. Just so they stay out. And then this one is one that I did earlier. This. So here, then the leg is in the way now. Here you have the genitalia out of this Futurus Firefly. This takes practice. I haven't done it in a while, and it's much harder with the microscope that I have the camera on. I can only use one eyepiece, but that's basically how you take the genitalia out. And again, it's so much easier with a fresh specimen than it is with any other specimen, but you can do it. So if you have an alcohol specimen, or even one that's pinned for years and years, like 100 years, you can soften them up and do it. So during my PhD, I worked with fireflies from Paris, specimens from the Paris Museum that were 100 years old. And I had to look at the genitalia because it was the only specimen known from the species. And we needed to look at the genitalia, so we extracted the genitalia from that. And I can tell you that I was very nervous because, destroying a specimen of a specimen of a species that's only known from this one specimen that's over 100 years old is not something I wanted to be known for. So yeah, that's how I usually do that.